Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Revelation Communication, episode number 76, season 3, episode number 8. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch or to listen, however it is you're receiving this podcast, man. Thank you so much for the continued support and encouragement that I see coming from y'all. Hey, listen, I want to get to our verse. I want to get to our subject. Right away here, and I picked a verse out of Luke chapter 5 in my studies of the gospel. I ran across this morning, and it kind of really just tied into what my idea was that I was going to do for this morning's podcast anyways. But Jesus said, no, excuse me, this was not Jesus speaking. This was actually an incident where Jesus was calling the disciples. We read that he went to Simon first, and then James and John, and they were fishing, and of course Jesus told them to follow me, and they became fishers of men. We read in Luke's account of the gospel, and then and then Jesus runs across a man named Levi, and Levi was a tax collector. The King James version calls tax collectors publicans, but he runs across this man Levi, who would later be named Matthew, who would become one of the apostles. But he tells Levi, follow me. So Levi, man, he immediately leaves what he was doing, man, being a tax collector, and follows Jesus. But in Luke chapter 5, there's an account where, basically Levi invites Jesus over to have this big feast, this big dinner that's taking place. And, at this dinner were other people that were eating and drinking with, with Jesus and with the disciples. And in verse 30, we see what the scribes and Pharisees, man, thought about this, and it says, but their scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples, saying, why do ye eat and drink with publicans and with sinners? And the whole irony of that statement, man, is that man, the scribes, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, man, they were just as evil, just as wicked sinners, just like the publicans and the harlots and all those in Jesus's day that he came to heal. But it can be argued that there was no greater hypocrite in the days of Jesus than the religious scribes, the religious Sadducees and Pharisees. Their teaching, their ideology, and their keeping of religion. Really, man, what it did was they sent and are sending today, sadly, multitudes of blind followers straight to hell because, man, they practice a religion that really is contrary to what God created. And listen, I'm not going to dive too much today into the Pharisees and Sadducees of Jesus's day on this particular episode, but I do want to encourage you, man, if you really want to know what Jesus felt about the Sadducees and Pharisees, man, and their hypocrisy, head on over to Matthew chapter 23, pick up right around verse 13, and you can read exactly what Jesus thought about the scribes and the Sadducees and Pharisees of his day. But I do want to touch on the idea of religion for a moment before I dive into today's subject. God did not create religion. Man did. God created relationships. God created man and woman to dwell with him and to have a relationship with him. And it was that way right from the get-go in the Garden of Eden. There was no religion in the Garden of Eden. There was only a relationship between God and his creation. That's how God created it. That's how God desired it. That's what God wanted for his creation, for man and woman to dwell with him, to have a relationship with him. But unfortunately, man messed that up. And really ever since then, man has created religion as a means to restore and reconcile themselves with God. The problem is that we can't. God sacrificed his relationship with his only begotten son so that our relationship with him can be restored. That's the only way. Whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, whether you practice a religion or not, God never intended for us to follow a religion or to practice a religion, but to rather walk in a relationship with Him. And that's what and why He sent Jesus to do, was to restore and to reconcile that relationship, and not have a religion. But man, back to the subject of today, and really, I want to talk about hypocrisy. I'm not sure that there is much else in this world today that gets me fired up as much as hypocrisy does. And I'm telling y'all right now, I am trying very hard as I sit here and do this to be very calm and very collected and very cool. But there ain't too many more things that get me fired up than hypocrites do. And listen, I know what y'all are going to think as I go through this. Well, Solomon, we ought to imitate Jesus. We ought to love and show mercy and have compassion the same way Jesus did, even with hypocrites. And man, I agree with you. 100% I agree with you. But I also want to share with you, if you didn't know, that Jesus also grabbed a whip and drove people out of the temple while flipping tables. And they were desecrating the holy ground that was built to honor and glorify God. And sometimes in imitating Jesus, we've got to have tough conversations, and we have to confront sin the same way Jesus did. And man, that often requires us to call it out and to drive it out. Now listen, I try to keep my devotions, what I post online. I try to keep these podcasts that I do as encouraging as possible, so that whoever reads them, whoever watches them, whoever listens to them can be edified, man, can be lifted up and can be encouraged in the Lord. I mean, that's my desire. But I also believe that from time to time, man, real talk needs to take place. Real conversation needs to happen. And sometimes those things are uncomfortable. Sometimes they're about things that many don't want to hear. They're about things that many don't even know about, and they're about things that many are trying to avoid today. And one of those things is hypocrisy, and this is such a big subject in today's headlines. The subject of hypocrisy. That I got to speak to it. I want to speak to it today. But, before I start speaking about some of the current events taking place in our nation and in the world that have hypocrisy on full display, I did want to say that the church is often the biggest hypocrite of them all. And I say that because the church, it's supposed to know the truth. The church is supposed to know the Bible. The church is supposed to know the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. The church is supposed to put on the Lord Jesus Christ. It's supposed to be the light and the salt. It's supposed to be the one place that hypocrisy really shouldn't exist, but it does. And that's because the church is full of fallen men and women who, they sometimes forget that the same grace and the same mercy and the same compassion and love that once saved a wretch like us is supposed to be shared and shown to the fallen world around them. And instead of judging, we judge. Instead of forgiving, just as Christ forgave us, we don't forgive. Instead of pulling the beam out of our own eye, we focus on the mote that is in our brother's eye. Instead of building up for edification of the saints, we tear down. Instead of loving unconditionally, we have conditions attached to our love. And so the church is not exempt from being hypocrites. In fact, because it's the church, it's magnified that much more when they are being hypocrites, because it is the church, a place that should not be hypocritical. But enough about the church. I've certainly beat up on them pretty good the last couple of months. But man, I want to move on first to talk about what's happening in Canada. My wife is Canadian, so I can beat up Canada for a little bit. Plus, she agrees with me on what's about to be said. Justin Trudeau is arguably one of the biggest hypocrites in the world today. Here's a man that would make the likes of Lenin, of Stalin, of Castro, of Hitler, of the CCP, very pleased with how he's handling his country right now. Okay? This guy, he kneeled with BLM protesters and stood in solidarity with the same people that were looting and rioting and burning down cities all over Canada, a couple of years ago, but yet calls the people that are peacefully protesting with their trucks across Canada right now domestic terrorists. He doesn't call the rioters, he doesn't call the people burning down buildings or looting, he doesn't call them domestic terrorists. No. He calls peaceful protesters sitting in their trucks, he calls them domestic terrorists. And he has now invoked an emergency act in Canada that gives him and him only, without any other person's prior approval, the ability to freeze bank accounts and to freeze the assets of those that are not only peacefully protesting, but those that are sending funding and supplies to those who do support these peaceful protesters. And listen, folks, you wanted fascism? You got it. You wanted socialism? Guess what? You got it. You wanted communism? You got it. Oh, and by the way, here's a man, if I can even call him that, who cowardly fled the Capitol while the truckers moved in. He has not once offered to sit with them. He has not once offered to hear them. He has not once offered to try to restore anything that him and his cabinet have stolen. And yes, they have stolen the rights from the Canadian citizens over the last 2 years, who now instead is trying to force order by quote unquote any means necessary. He said that. He's going to use any means necessary to stop the peaceful protests taking place in Canada. What does any means necessary mean? Does he mean that he's going to call out the military to stop them, or use the police to stop them by force? Are you going to shoot your own citizens, Mr. Trudeau? Are you going to imprison your own peaceful protesting citizens? Why didn't you do this, Mr. Trudeau, when your citizens were burning down cities, when your citizens were looting and rioting and causing chaos and anarchy? Mr. Trudeau, where were you? This is hypocrisy at its finest. But I'm going to stop on Canada. I can keep beating up Canada, but the United States has its own problems. And I want to talk about a couple of those right now. Show of hands. How many of you are aware of the Durham report that came out a couple of days ago proving that Hillary Clinton and company spied on Donald Trump during his campaign and during his presidency? Show of hands. Who's heard of the Durham report that's come out in the last couple of days? How many of you have seen that headline on ABC News, on CBS News? How many of you have seen that headline of the Durham report on MSNBC? What should be the headline of the century, in that treason has been committed against the highest office in this nation and arguably in the world, on CNN and on Fox News and on every other news source, is instead being replaced with talk about the Super Bowl and its halftime show and the fact that the racist Whoopi Goldberg is back on The View. Why isn't this headline news across the world that treason was committed against the highest office in this nation. Folks, listen to me. Irrefutable evidence has been found that Hillary Clinton spied on Donald Trump. And listen, I don't care if you don't like Trump or not. That's irrelevant. The fact is, it's illegal what took place. And against a sitting president by a U.S. citizen, it's called treason, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot escape that. And yet, this satanic, hypocrite woman, Hillary Clinton, has the audacity, folks, listen to what I'm about to tell you, to tweet out this morning that, and I quote, Hillary Clinton said this morning, "Our democracy is in crisis. How do we fix it?" Ladies and gentlemen, Hillary Clinton tweeted, "Our democracy is in crisis. How do we fix it?" I'll tell you how we fix it. The same way we would have fixed it when this nation was founded. Treason was punishable by death. You hung on the gallows or you faced a firing squad. That's how you fix what's going on with our democracy today. If this doesn't make you angry as a citizen of the United States of America, God help you, because your ignorance is contributing to why we're here in the first place. You know, outside of the recent revelation by John Durham and his report regarding Hillary, there has been no bigger hypocrite in the United States of America than that of the Hollywood, athletes, and political elite that have been enjoying themselves to their fullest extent at the football games that have been taking place these last few weeks. You know, these same actors, these same politicians, these same athletes that have been pushing the narratives over the last couple of years that you've got to wear a diaper on your face or that you've got to take some sort of jab, have had their hypocrisy on full display recently. And folks, I'm just sick of it. I'm sick and tired of having other people tell me that I got to do something that, by the way, I don't have to do. All the while, they're not doing what they're telling me I've got to do. These same people will share a photo, because it's a photo opportunity, of them wearing a diaper on their face while telling me I have to wear one. All the while, they're going maskless all over town around people that are packed into a stadium without any regard. They don't care. They don't care. I'm sorry, man, but if California can host the biggest event of the year from a sports standpoint, there's no pandemic, people. There's no pandemic. There's nothing going on. This is ridiculous, and I'm sick and tired of it. And listen, if you sent your kids to school on Monday where they are required to wear a mask still, even though the mandate has been lifted effective today, February 15th, 2022, there's no longer a mask mandate in California. How convenient. But yet, you're sending your kids to school who are required to still wear a mask. Folks, you are the problem, mom and dad. You're the problem. You know how we got the Constitution of the United States of America? We fought for it. And if you don't want to lose the freedoms and rights given to us by our founding fathers, which we are slowly losing, y'all better be ready to fight. Because what we've seen happen in Australia this past year, what we've seen happening in Canada right now, folks, it's coming to our front door. And I'm afraid, based on what I've seen so far, that many here in America are going to surrender it all for the sake of peace and unity, while others are going to pick up arms to defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. If you're not awake yet to the wickedness and to the evil, to the hypocrisy that is plaguing this nation and the world, folks, it's time to wake up. You need to shake yourself out of the slumber and come to grips with the reality that we are fighting a fight that stretches beyond Democrat versus Republican. It stretches beyond white or black. This fight is literally good versus evil. And you must pick a side. There's no neutral option. No one can play Switzerland. You must choose good or evil before the option to choose is taken away from you. Folks, wake up. Wake up. I'm going to end it right there today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Solomon Stewart with Revelation Communication.